find onion, you could find basil, you could find thyme, you could find rosemary, you could find, these different things that we normally just think of as basic foods. And we wanted to show people how to be able to use them as antivirals, how to be able to use them to boost immune system, how to be able to reset and reawaken the mind and feeling and, good feelings, positive feelings after so much uncertainty with, this whole pandemic thing and the disrupt that it's caused. And so
hello, Hamilton. Thank you for coming on the show, man. Welcome to the Real Talks podcast.
Hi, Antonio. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here and excited to talk about all these amazing things that we're going to get into today.
For sure. I've been interested in consciousness for a couple years now. It's mostly being fueled by other podcasters talking about it, reading about Mike and Poland. I know you've been on Aubrey Marcus's show and Chris Williamson's show. And I've heard you talk a lot about ayahuasca and your journey. But you've mentioned that right now it's a trending topic. A lot of people seems to be talking about psychedelics. We've seen academia really get behind it. And I've heard you mention that this wasn't such a trending topic when you begun, and that you're one of the first westernized shamans. So what drew you into this, man?
Well, I think like a lot of people, I had graduated from the university and had that burning question of what was going to come next. And I wasn't really sure where I was headed in my life at that time. And I ultimately had a spontaneous spiritual awakening in my early 20s, the year after I graduated from the university. And it was in that awakening that I realized there was just a lot more going on to life and a lot more going on to the idea of spirituality than I had been introduced to in my youth. And ultimately that sent me on a path looking for mystics and looking for visionary experiences and following that spiritual awakening that I was having. And I just simply took it seriously. I thought it was a transformation that was really, taking place. And I decided to take the journey, and that journey ultimately led me down to Peru, into the Amazon, and into the hands of incredible mystics and their knowledge of the forest.
So this mystical experience that you had, was it something because you took a substance? Was it that you were meditating, or how did it come about?
Well, it started with first really giving my life back to spirit. I felt like I had kind of, also gotten off on the wrong path. Like I wasn't really sure the direction to take in my early 20s. And so I kind of had this symbolic offering where I offered my life back to spirit. And then it was completely sober. And, I just started to spontaneously have experiences of spirit after that. And so, there were different kinds of visions and there were different kinds of dreams. Things were very prophetic at that period of time. And ultimately, most of those visions came true. And so I just followed them.
Wow. So these visions told you that you had to go to the Amazon and that you had to look for mystics. And when did you first encounter ayahuasca?
Well, I was literally told that I would go to Peru and that I would travel through Peru and that within 90 days I would find an apprenticeship and that I would actually apprentice to, master mystics. And so I was on a quest, and I just went as a backpacker, literally on this quest, and, sought out just kind of going around, asking around if anybody knew of anyone that kind of knew of these topics. And there really wasn't much about it at that period of time. It was not a popular thing. It was not known about worldwide. It was not talked about openly, so it was just kind of a very personal, internal journey. And that took me also around, Peru. And ultimately I found myself in the Amazon and, deep in the forest on this trek. And along the way, we picked up a shaman that knew of ayahuasca. And I ended up having my first ayahuasca ceremony in 2001.
Wow. And for someone that might not know what ayahuasca is, would you mind briefly explaining what it is and what it's made of?
Sure. Ayahuasca is a visionary tea. It's a mixture of different kinds of plants. Typically, it's made of two plants. There's the vine of ayahuasca itself, which is a vine in the forest, and then there's the leaves of the chacruna tree. And you mix the chacruna leaves with the vine, and the combination is ayahuasca. And then there are many, many different practitioners of ayahuasca that are called medico-vegetalistas, or doctors of plants of the jungle. And they have different recipes for it, but those are the two main ingredients. It's considered a medicinal plant and a purgative, and it's also extremely visionary. And so it's administered in a ritualistic ceremonial setting, and the mystics wield the ayahuasca as part of the ceremony, and that the people that participate in it, are kind of under the guiding direction of the shamans in the ceremony itself. It's not something that you just take. It's not something that you experiment with or just kind of test out. It's unbelievably serious, and it needs to be used in the hands of trained professionals.
So you met with this mystic. Would you sort of guide us of how these ceremonies usually go? And for someone that's never taken ayahuasca like me, how would you describe that experience?
Well, the ceremonies themselves start at a specific time. So each practitioner has his or her own time that they typically start. And then you just sit down, and the ritual is pretty simplistic. The shamans sing to the ayahuasca. They chant Icaros. It's a way of communicating with the plants and with the nature of the energy and the spirit. It has a tremendously important and profound effect to the nature of the ceremony itself. And, then the ayahuasca is administered. You drink it. It's a tea, so you drink it. And then within about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, some people 30 minutes, and even in some rare cases longer, it takes for the effects to start to come on. And the effects usually start with a warming through the body. And then after that, you kind of start to have an opened experience of consciousness. You become much more attuned to the nature around you and to the interconnectedness of everything. And then from there, typically the visionary experience starts. You find yourself typically most often in a multidimensional space that's filled with all different kinds of patterns and geometry, very much like the tapestry behind me, but it's multidimensional. And so you see it, through the room, through the space, and between all of the different participants in the ceremony, between you and the shaman, etc. And then within that space, the visionary experience takes place. As a purgative, ayahuasca can make you throw up. It can make you defecate. It's part of the cleansing. And usually there's a psychosomatic or psychological process that takes place that's part of the cleansing experience. So not only are you just throwing up, but typically things that you would consider to be bad things from your past, or psychological difficulties that you've had, or even like we talked about at the beginning, procrastination. These would be things that could be coming up and actually being purged in the ceremony itself. And the purpose of it is a total cleansing and healing of the body, of the mind, and of the spirit.
And the shaman has a very important role. While you're undergoing this experience, the shaman is chanting Icaros. And what else are you doing when you're guiding people through this experience?
It's a really dynamic process, and you train for many, many years. You have to become very attuned to what's taking place without verbal communication around you. And so you have to become very visionary yourself to be able to understand what is taking place with the different participants in the ceremony. And it also depends on the size of the ceremony. We've held ceremony with just one other person, and the largest ceremonies we've held had 50 plus participants in them. And so you're guiding the ceremony the entirety of the time. You're utilizing a nature of intention, the Icaros themselves, which is a sacred form of communication between you and all of the energies that are part of the ceremony and the participants themselves. And so you're really utilizing that as a tool to be able to manage the space for everybody and make sure everybody stays safe while they go through the process.
Wow, would you give us an example of an Icaro? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Icaro. Yeah, it's a word from the Amazon. It's part of the dialect here, and it is its own verb. And so there's singing, that's a verb, to sing, to chant, to invoke. These are, different terms. And then there's a verb which is to create Icaros or to sing Icaros, and they call it Icarar. And they can be sung, they can be whistled. So a whistling Icaro is, and chant Icaro. Like that. And then sometimes there are lyrics in Icaros. Tronco e manta sitoini, yana yana lo punitaini. Alto e manta tronco sito, punta e manta e cogogito. Flor sitanguillo loro, so cuerpo sitoini. And that way you work with the different rhythms, different melodies, different tones. They all have different meanings, and they ultimately affect the total vibration of the ceremony itself. And in normal, experience, in your normal state of consciousness, that's typically not so intense to have an experience like that, to be so affected. But when you're in the experience of ayahuasca and you're in the ceremonies, the vibrational changes of the room become extremely, impactful. And so the chants and the Icaros really do change the visionary nature of the experience that you're having. And they ultimately help connect you to all of the nature around you and to all of the different energies that the forest brings.
Yeah, because when you're in a psychedelic state, when you've just ingested psychedelics, from what I know, it's not like you're drunk and you're really numb. You're like in this hyper alert state of consciousness. How would you describe that?
I think you described it well. It's a hyper alert or hyper aware state. I call it ultra lucidity. You're not drunk. You don't feel quote unquote drugged. It's not like that at all. On the contrary, you typically feel like all of your senses are on. You're hyper aware of your senses. You're very aware of yourself. What can be really amazing about that is you can have a completely intact experience of self. You can feel 100% completely, totally sober, but you can close your eyes and open your eyes and close your eyes and literally be having the same vision. So you could be, in an environment that looks like it's daytime, even though the ceremony is taking place at night. You could be somewhere that is not the ceremonial house. You could literally be in another plane of existence, having a completely visionary experience, but you are sober and lucid, and you are fully aware of the experience that you're having. And like I said, it's nothing like being drunk or stupefied by a kind of chemical or something like that.
So the people that go to your retreat, what are they mostly looking for?
I think the majority of people that are taking these substances are looking for a kind of personal healing or personal growth and development. There's kind of two camps. There's the people that have acute problems and they know it and they're trying to solve those problems. And then there are other people who are trying to improve their lives and ultimately have a better life and get more out of life. And they're trying to increase their overall understanding of spirituality. They're expanding their consciousness, and they really are there to learn. Our center's been, very, very serious and dedicated to the medicinal practices of these plants. And so we've been known for, very strict, very professional practice. And so there are very few people that come for just exploration. Most people are coming for a very specific reason. They feel a calling, and it's typically, like I said, around healing or around, total human optimization and the expansion of consciousness.
So when somebody comes to you, let's say they're very anxious or they get depressed, because I know that psychedelics have been used to treat anxiety and depression. What do you usually do in order to heal this? Is it more the ayahuasca acting, or is it the healer or the shaman really guiding the trip so that they sort of like a therapy?
Oh, it's very much like a therapy, although there's very little talking, so it's not talk therapy. You don't have to talk about the nature of the experience at all, but it is a guided 100% of the time. If you just take ayahuasca, you may or may not be able to help somebody. You may or may not be able to heal somebody. It's a misunderstanding to think of the ayahuasca tea itself as the medicine. There's a sacred trinity that's necessary to be able to ensure a proper outcome with ayahuasca, and that's really professionally made ayahuasca itself, and then it's also the medicine person or the shaman, and it's the idea of spirit or the forest having life and the different medicinal plants having a kind of energy that can be imparted to you. And so you need all three aspects of it to be able to have what we would consider to be a medicine ceremony. And then the way that you ultimately guide somebody is through a transformational journey, which will come to a point where the origins or the source of the problem are released from the person. And so the person will go on a journey. It's non-linear. It can be super intense, unbelievably intense. It can also be very, very mild. It'll have waves. It'll be stronger. It'll be subtler. There'll be much brighter colors, much more visions. There'll be less, etc. And through that period of time, the person's entire energetic body, their physical body, their mind, and their consciousness is being really attuned to another vibration or another frequency that no longer is creating the anxiety or creating the depression or creating the attachment to the experiences from the past that have caused these problems.
So do you think it's mostly something that cures psychological problems, or have you seen it cure other types of like more chronic diseases? What examples have you had in your retreat or in your center?
Sure. I think a lot has to do with timing, and it has to do with the individual person. So there's many, many different kinds of illnesses that are treated with ayahuasca and also other medicinal plants. The other medicinal plants typically are not talked about as much because since ayahuasca is the visionary plant, it's the one that gets, the most attention. But really what's important are the different medicinal plants that are used. And so when you heal in the Amazon, you heal the physical body, but you also heal the spirit at the same time. And the spirit could just be thought of as like the really, really deep you inside yourself. Like just think about if you're in a lot of pain and you feel it, that's you. When you're really happy and you feel it, that's you. That's what they're referring to as your spirit. So it's not like a foreign concept, independent of you. It's the deepest part of what it is for you to be alive. And so whenever you're sick in the Amazon, the traditional people believe that you need to fix the body part where, there could be some kind of chronic disease or illness. And then you also need to fix the self. You need to, because the self has been changed or altered through the traumatic experience of illness itself, you're also going to treat the self. And you'll do that with the kinds of ceremonies like ayahuasca. So when you combine the different kinds of treatments together, you ultimately treat much more than just psychological illnesses. So in terms of psychological illnesses, you can treat PTSD, depression, anxiety disorders, etc. And with the help of other kinds of medicinal plants, you can also treat lots of other physical illnesses, from gastrointestinal illnesses to, even cancer has been treated. Blindness has been reversed, which is, truly miraculous. And different kinds of literally miraculous healings take place. Chronic pain goes away for some people. Injury sites where they've had different kinds of injuries or surgery sites can be healed as well. And there can be a tremendous physical transformation. It's not yet fully studied by science. And so it's not clear, why some people get healed physically and other people don't. In the mysticism, they look at it that's an unknown, and you just try to heal everybody that you can. and some people will be healed, and obviously others won't. And you're looking for an efficacy rate or effective rate that's very similar to that of Western medicine.
And what are the potential dangers from participating in this ayahuasca ceremonies?
Well, I think the biggest danger is that you have a negative effect instead of a positive effect. And it can be a very intense experience, which is why I say it's something you don't want to experiment with. This is not an experimental thing. Ayahuasca has been used for literally thousands of years in the Amazon as a form of healing. And there's a reason why it ultimately ended up in the hands of professionals that were highly trained in the use of it. To give you a perspective, typical training is anywhere from 5 to 10 years. And it usually takes between 10 and 15 years before you're considered really well-trained and really experienced in the practice. So, it's a tremendous amount of training that goes into being a traditional Amazonian medicine person. The dangers are that you have a negative effect ultimately.
When you talk about training, how's that training like? What do you usually do?
Training is completely intense. It's a different form of learning than you've ever experienced from a Western perspective. Fundamentally, you go through long periods of ceremonies and long periods of dietas. And dietas are fasts where you're only allowed to eat a very limited number of foods, and you're only allowed to drink a very limited number of things to drink, really only water and lemongrass tea. And you're only allowed to eat a couple of foods during the fast. You have very low caloric intake. And the fasts can, depending on your lineage, can be weeks long, or they can be months long to years long. And during that period of time, you drink lots of different kinds of medicinal plants. So you go into states of consciousness where you can learn directly from the plants. The beginning of training is to learn how to communicate with the plants so that the plants can teach you directly. And then that's facilitated by the medicine people. So the shaman really bridges your consciousness or makes a connection between you and the medicinal plants so that then they can continue to work with you and you can access their knowledge. And then once that link has been made, you're then in that world. And it's a directly transformative experience. It's not the taking on of just information. It's not book learning. It's a thing that you do through these transformative experiences that ultimately give you the skills that are necessary to be able to practice.
Because you're learning, you're experiencing it while you're learning. So it's like very hands-on from what I'm hearing.
That's correct. It's 100% experiential learning. Yeah, it's 100% experiential learning. There's literally almost no data information. It's all taught through oral history. So you get told stories and you're expected to learn from the stories. And other than that, you're in ceremony or you're in dieta. And, to give you an idea, typical apprenticeship, you'll participate in over 100 ceremonies a year. And you'll also be in dieta over 200 days a year.
Wow. So you're fasting right now, basically, in a dieta of some sort.
Yeah, you would be if you were in training. Correct.
Okay. Wow. So I really want to understand how we could, like, if somebody's thinking about doing ayahuasca, what can he do to really safeguard himself so he has the least amount of associated risk with the experience? So, like, what are some good practices that someone can follow in order to do the research, really understand what he's getting into and the potential drawbacks and pros from the experience?
The best thing to do is to go online and to first research. And I think it's always important that you reserve your own beliefs for yourself. So when you do research, don't believe what you read online. The idea is to get a sample set of a lot of information so that you can make an educated decision from that information. And then, you need to find, if you're from a Western culture, you need to find a center or organization that has really created a safe container for this experience for you. So I think that that's very important to understand, that if you're going, to other countries and you're going to go have these kinds of experiences, you want to go somewhere safe. And so research the very best centers, research the places that are getting, the highest reviews, and research how long they've been around, research the medicine practitioners who work at the centers, and, take into consideration all the pros and all the cons. Listen to all the positive statements and all the criticisms, and see if there's any validity to that. And then you can also write the center if you have any questions as well. You don't just have to book a retreat. You can write the center and ask questions. They should be willing to answer your questions if you have any about your safety and security. You need to find a center that does medical intake. It's very important that you are an appropriate candidate for these substances. There are many contraindications from other kinds of medicines, especially different psychological or psychiatric medications that are contraindicated. You need to make sure that you have the right health in terms of physical health, the right heart condition, etc. You also want to make sure that you don't have in your family lineage different kinds of historic mental illness and things like that. So you need to find a center that has, proper medical intake procedures and knows how to understand whether or not you're a proper candidate. That way you're really decreasing the risks. And then from there, you're looking to find the place where you most kind of align with what it feels like their energy is or what they're really all about.
Wow. That's really great. That feels like really good practices and something that people really should do if they're researching and if they're trying to have this experience. So as someone that's guided, I think, thousands of ayahuasca ceremonies, what insights have you gained about consciousness, and how has it changed the world that you interact with people and just view the world in general?
Well, first of all, it made consciousness something that was real for me, not just a concept. And it also showed me that it was fundamentally a tool and something that we experience in an innate part of our nature. I learned that consciousness is not something that has yet been studied by science. Consciousness has been used to create science. And so, I got the opportunity to be able to explore consciousness in a very deep way. And the way that it ultimately shaped my worldview was that it rewrote it. It showed me that we are consciousness first and human and body second. And that as an expression of consciousness, we're fundamentally connected to the universe, and that the universe is part and parcel of us. And so it changed the way that I ultimately oriented myself with the world and the universe, and also how I understood what it was to be a conscious being, as well as the responsibilities of consciousness. What we do with our consciousness is ultimately what the world becomes. And so it made consciousness unbelievably important to me, as well as, something that is incredibly powerful. And when you look at the collective humanity, 7-8 billion people that are all part of consciousness, sharing in this tremendous collective consciousness, we see the impact that it has on each other, and we see the impact that it has on the earth. And, fundamentally, I think that impact of our consciousness is incredibly important. And it's something to learn from and to make ultimately over time positive, something that could be a tremendously positive experience for yourself, for your loved ones, for your family, and obviously for your society and your culture, and then the world at large. And so I just saw that consciousness is, unbelievably potent and powerful. And what we do with it requires the utmost of responsibility. And it's a tremendous gift. And without it, we wouldn't know ourselves. And that's just something fundamentally miraculous.
Yeah, it's the biggest mystery out there. So when were you like, okay, I'm starting to understand the power of consciousness and what it's really capable of?
I think I'm still discovering the power of it. I think I started to get really interested in the idea of consciousness about 15 to 20 years ago. And it became a question that was part of our training. At first, the training was just really focused on survival and learning how to work with the plants and being able to use them to heal. But then the greater question of, well, where is all of this coming from, started to become more and more and more important. And for me, that question was answered in the idea of consciousness. So, it's very easy to ask, where did the universe come from? Where did, is there God? I don't know. Like there's all these like really big questions about the world, right? Like, what are people believing in? What are these mythologies that we're, faced with, et cetera? And so I thought that consciousness was the locus of study that could help take us to maybe getting some rational understanding and answers to those really big questions. So it was, an interesting and unbelievable honor, but I was working from the age of my early 20s with people from all over the world, of all different age groups, of all different backgrounds, of literally every single kind of profession that you could imagine, from, sort of your normal, workers and local people, all the way to, people who are very significant and famous and, of the world. And so to be able to have on a day in, day out basis been questioned and asked literally every kind of question you could imagine, it just kept kind of beating the drum or tapping on that same locus, like, where is all of this coming from? What is this consciousness that everybody's dealing with? And, why is it such a powerful experience? And also, why does it seem to create so many difficulties? Why are people having so many, different kinds of psychological difficulties? And so it kept always pointing back to consciousness. And so that ultimately became a passion of mine to study consciousness. And the way that we studied it was through ceremony and through fasting and dietas, and obviously interaction with each other.
Wow. So if somebody, now that unfortunately we're in this pandemic, if somebody wants to sort of get a glimpse of this altered states of consciousness from their homes, is there anything that we can drink? Is there a fast that we could do? What should people do if they want to try to start and understand what you're talking about?
Yeah, when the pandemic hit, it was the first time that our, retreat facility and our lodge got closed or shut down for the first time in 19 years. And so what we did was we went online. We created an online facility and institute, and we offer these kinds of experiences without the visionary plants, utilizing different kinds of breath work that take you into an altered state, that help you go into a trance state. And then we teach you how to use medicinal plants that are legal and available from online or from your, local health food store or grocery store, into being able to experience the plants and experience the kinds of things that we're talking about. And so you can go to our website at bluemorphoretreats.world. That's bluemorphoretreats.world. And you can sign up for any one of our retreats. We have entire video packages that can take you through the experience. And we also do live retreats as well. And it's an incredible way to learn about these fastings and intermittent fastings, to be able to learn about medicinal plants, how to be able to communicate with them, how to go into an altered state, how to go into a trance state, how to be able to have the, cleanse and personal transformation that comes from that experience. And all of it's guided by us. So we really take you on a step-by-step journey into understanding this. And it's a great way to be able to kind of, start to have an experience and gain some understanding without having to make such a commitment as, going straight into these unbelievably powerful visionary plants. It's a good stepping stone.
So is this breath work like holotropic breathing? How are these sessions like? Could you give us like an example? I've never done one myself.
Sure, it's similar to that. There are different kinds of breaths. So there's breaths that you breathe in and out really quickly, and for a series of number of times of breaths or of time. And then there's exhalations and times that you hold the breath. And then we also teach a kind of breath where it's very, very big and deep and fast into the lungs, and then very, very long and slow, is really as long and slow as you possibly can exhale. And then another breath like that again. And you just do it rhythmically over and over and over and over. And after about 5 to 10 minutes, you're in an ecstatic state. You're in an altered state of consciousness, and you're in a much more open state. And then you're able to tap into the plants and have the visionary experience.
Is this something that the shamans do, or is this something that you started studying now with the whole pandemic and trying to figure out how to help people achieve these states?
Well, we use a different, style of breathing normally, and we teach a different style of breathing to be able to manage yourself in the ceremonies. And so changing breath work as part of the ceremony is something that we've always done. But to use it principally as a method to be able to go into trance state and to support the trance state is something that we've really, brought forward and increased the potency of, so that people could do this from home. The idea was, especially during the pandemic, that to have you be able to participate in a retreat and to be able to get the most out of that retreat, even if you were under, total lockdown without even being able to go to a grocery store. The goal was that you could go to your spice rack in your house. You could go to, what you have in the refrigerator, and you would be able to find garlic. You could find turmeric. You could find onion. You could find basil. You could find thyme. You could find rosemary. You could find, these different things that we normally just think of as basic foods. And we wanted to show people how to be able to use them as antivirals, how to be able to use them to boost immune system, how to be able to reset and reawaken the mind and feeling and, good feelings, positive feelings after so much uncertainty with, this whole pandemic thing and the disrupt that it's caused. And so our goal was to, create an experience that was truly holistic, that could really take care of all of your needs over a short period of time, to be able to give you that burst and that help to kind of shake off, any kind of negativity, procrastination, difficulties associated with the whole pandemic itself. And at the same time, instead of sitting in fear and being scared of what could happen, to be proactive and to already become healthier, to already make healthier choices around food, to be able to make healthier choices around, what kinds of natural medicinal plants are available, how to be able to boost the immune system and stay healthy through this pandemic.
So you're like a master in putting yourself in a hyper uncertainty, because I'm assuming that every time you take ayahuasca, you're like, don't know exactly what's going to happen. So how did you get past that fear that's associated in being in that hyper uncertain state?
Well, the hyper uncertain state is a very exciting state, and you learn to embrace the excitement of it instead of fear. And training trains you to be able to know that you can handle what's coming. So you learn that you can fundamentally handle what's coming next, and you have to stay very present. So instead of thinking a plan like you get taught, well, what's your 5-year plan? What's your 10-year plan? It's like, what am I doing right now? And what's happening and what's coming at me to do right now? And everything stays now. So there's this like constant evolution of the now, where it's just like now. And in that sort of stasis state, everything is changing, everything's uncertain, but you have an inner knowledge that you can face it. You have an inner knowledge that you have the strength to be able to deal with it. You have the capacity, and you teach your mind to be a tool of positivity and support instead of fear and holding you back. So your mind is positive, your mind is centered, you're aware, and you accept the uncertainty fundamentally for what it is. You don't try to figure it out. It's impossible. And so you just keep dealing with each thing that there is to deal with in that moment. You turn it into a dance. We like to think that you dance with the uncertainty and it becomes certain in real time. And so you just have to stay really present. You have to stay really in the now. You have to stay really awake and, full-hearted and really courageous. And then you just step into it moment by moment by moment. And you fundamentally trust life. So you start in a place of trust instead of in a place of fear. You start in a place of courage and the acceptance of that unknown, and you embrace it and you make it something positive, because you know that in the unknown, there is at least the possibility of positive change. In the unknown, there's the possibility of something magnificent happening. In the unknown, it doesn't have to be scary or bad. On the contrary, it has within it, absolute potential. So harness that potential and then do everything you can to make the most out of it and make it as positive as you possibly can.
Yeah, because you're seeing so many things that you can't really explain. I feel like you've really learned to live in the present moment and sort of not try to conceptualize everything that you experience and not try it. As you say, it's starting in a place of trust. I feel everybody could really benefit from that.
Well, over time, you understand that the experience is fundamentally trustworthy. And ultimately, life is fundamentally trustworthy. It's hard for us to imagine life in the totality of it. But I like to think of our ancestors who have all lived whole lives. So I think of us as all having only lived part of a life. And you have to live the entirety of your life to fully understand what life is or what life was. And that ultimately includes the transition beyond what we think of as, being a human being alive. And instead of being scared of that, I like to think of our ancestors, where literally billions of ancestors have already lived an entire life. They from millions of years ago to hundreds of thousands of years ago to just now, there's a constant flow of life itself. And I think people over time have become very scared of life. And we fundamentally are not. We love life. We think life is unbelievably exciting. We fundamentally accept the idea of transition or death. It's a part of life, just like birth was. And we trust in the idea of spirit. We trust in the idea of an afterlife. It doesn't have to have a mythological or religious context like the way it's been presented before. It's not so binary or dualistic as, this happens to you or that happens to you. We believe it's much more ample than that. It's this idea of energy and spirit and consciousness and continued growth and evolution. And so we try to conceptualize the entirety of life as something that is very trustworthy. So instead of being scared of it, and instead of being scared of being alive and wondering the negatives of what could happen to you, we're, staying present, and we're working on how to make things right now positive. And then you experience that positivity, and you can actually grow that positivity. You can change your behavior and your habits to ultimately have a better experience or an easier experience. And so that's something that's fundamental to our practices.
I also feel that having death very present, knowing that, for example, I've heard and I've read that taking ayahuasca could sometimes really convince you that you're going to die. So after the experience, you're really grateful that you didn't die, but you thought you were gonna. So after you have that click in your brain, I could really see how you start to appreciate life more and focus on the positive.
Yeah, it's very true. It's called the vine of the soul because it puts you in direct connection with the eternal version of you. Right now, we're in the temporal version of ourselves. And the eternal version is something that mystics have talked about through all of our history. So it's something that there's a tremendous amount of thought about, a tremendous amount of writing, a tremendous amount of conceptualization, is this idea of the total you or the eternal you. And these ceremonies now have had millions of people who have all said the same thing, that they have had an awakening experience to that state. They thought they were dying. They ultimately were not. And by confronting that, it gave them a whole new appreciation for life itself. By confronting those fears, it helped them transition and transcend beyond the nature of those fears, and ultimately have an even deeper love and appreciation for what it is to be alive. And that's very, very true. That being said, that's also another reason why you need to be extremely prepared to have these kinds of visionary experiences so that they themselves are not traumatizing. because if you're not prepared to have that experience and that awakening, it could take a while to integrate that.
So when you say prepared, how could someone know whether they're prepared or not to have an experience like this one?
I think you just have to get to a place where you fully accept whatever the outcome is, and that you can go in with a very strong intention of that outcome being positive and really coming from the heart, and really, in that sense, being self-guided. That you're fully embracing the unknown going into that ceremony. That you're going to approach it from the heart. You're going to ask for a really positive, really transformational experience from the plants. You're going to, ask that from the heart. You're not, playing around. You're not experimenting. You're not joking around. You're coming from a very honest place, a very humble place, and you'll have the best opportunity for a positive experience.
Well, that's truly amazing, and I'm really eager to see what other things you guys come up with, what other techniques you guys develop to sort of achieve this teachings of being in other states of consciousness, and really trying to conceptualize and understand what consciousness really means. And with that being said, is there anything else that you would like to say, or anything you want to promote specifically?
Sure. I would love to share with your audience what we are up to these days. So we have bluemorphoretreats.world, and there we're offering the experiences that we've been talking about, but without the use of ayahuasca, obviously. But it's a very deep, very profound experience that's happening. And it's an incredible way to learn about everything that I've been talking about and sharing. And in conjunction with that, I am in the process of publishing 2 books. So the first book is The Mystical Secrets of Medicine versus Sorcery, The Untold Story of Ayahuasca. And it's a book that tells the first half of my apprenticeship. And then the second book is Mystical Secrets to Money Magic, Creating Infinite Wealth and Success. So I've written these 2 books. I'm very excited to be able to share these books. They're going to be published on Amazon next week. So Cool. It's, by the time you launch the podcast, they'll be available. And we also have a digital platform that we're launching called sizzle.media. And Sizzle is a new video sharing platform for a new futuristic kind of digital community. The community is self-valued in a crypto token. It's the Sizzle token, and it's a way for digital community to be able to share video content. It's a way for content creators to be fairly paid and better remunerated for what they do. It's a place where community members and fans are also paid for their participation in the viewing of content and the sharing of content, and also for helping grow the community. So sizzle.media is very incredible project that we've been involved in and developing over the last 3 years. And it will also be launched at the time that this podcast is aired. So